never thought I'd hear that from Teddy Bruschi. Let's deep dive this. Phil Perry joining the conversation. Curran, where do the Patriots go from here with Coach Bill Belichick?
Well, first I want to say that having Teddy Bruschi say that is like having the Pope tell God it's time to step down. It's just, I can't believe. I mean, Teddy is.
We're there. That's where we are.
Teddy is as dyed-in-the-wool loyal as it is. And that's hard to watch because it's okay with us slappies out here saying it might be time. But what Teddy Bruschi does, that it's a little bit.
Is it time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're a 1-7 team in 2 weeks and everything that you've authored, and I've gone through it chapter and verse, the personnel, the cap management, the value picks that you made in terms of Jonnu Smith and Nelson Aguilar, for instance, and the Jacoby Myers going elsewhere, the fact that your teams are not ready to play football on Sundays, as is indicated by the number of times you fall behind by 2 touchdowns or more, all of it indicates a team that, as Teddy's pointing out, he just can't reach anymore. And it is definitely sad to see it happen. Is it time for Bill to go? Unless there's a 180, it might have to be a 540, Phil.
Yeah, is there any scenario
It's a lot of spins,
that either of you can come up with, Phil or Giles, that's like, well, you could make the argument that, run it out there one more time. Maybe he's learned his lesson. I mean, obviously, I don't feel that way, but maybe there's an argument to be made that you don't walk away from him after this year, that there is another option.
Yeah, not based on the way things are trending, but, I think when you look at this, it's a question of, I think some people are questioning, and it's a fair conversation to have. Should it happen even before the season ends? Now, I would look at it and say, I'm not sure how much you accomplish by doing that, number one. And number two, I don't think that's where Robert Kraft wants to go. But there are other situations mid-season here, even though it might not be a firing, so to speak, Giles, where ownership maybe should stick its nose in there and start helping with some roster decisions, if not outright making them himself, if you're Robert Kraft, because you have opportunities to get your team better potentially for future years that you might want to seize upon right now.
Well, that's a decision they're going to have to make pretty quickly here, right?
2 weeks is the trade deadline.
2 weeks for the trade deadline, so they're going to have to figure out if they want to start making the say themselves, ownership, or whether that's Matt Groh, whoever, because I don't think you can kind of just let things hang in the balance there and just say, all right, Bill, do whatever you want to do with the trade deadline if you're not planning on bringing them back next year.
Well, that leads us into the question that we would like you guys at home to answer. How much power should Bill Belichick have at the trade deadline? Total control, input but not final say, or hands off, he's gone soon? Join the conversation. Vote in the poll by going to NBCSportsBoston.com/early edition or scan the QR code on the screen. Scroll down to that poll. I mean, I obviously agree with you guys, right? Like, if you go into this trade deadline and this is, ostensibly you should be trading pieces away, right? Like, you should be trading something away to get something in return and setting yourself up for next year, keeping pieces around that maybe you feel like you want there for a long time. My question is, and you guys know him better than any of us, is how is Bill Belichick going to feel if Robert Kraft comes downstairs and says, yeah, you got to trade Josh Uche, Kyle Duggar, Hunter Henry, and Mike Gesicki. And you got to start playing some of these other guys on your roster because we got to find out what we have for next year. So move those guys.
That won't happen, and it wouldn't go well. I do think that what could happen is that if Bill says we want to move on from Onwenu, and these are all guys, as you mentioned, and there's a few others. Kendrick Bourne is in there as well with an expiring contract who might have value elsewhere, Trent Brown being another. I think that what Robert would want to employ would be veto power. And he'd also want to say, what are we doing at this trade deadline? Because while Uche, Onwenu, and Duggar were all going to command semi-big ticket numbers as free agents, all of their markets are going to be depressed because of this Patriots season and their production, but they could still conceivably get something for all of them. You could conceivably get something for Kendrick Bourne, a 4th-round pick, a 5th-round pick. So, and they have $100 million. I mean, that to me is you have $100 million in cap space in 5 months. You have to start mobilizing now. Would Robert Kraft maybe bring in a consultant to oversee what's going on? Because Matt Groh is only going to do what Bill says. He says jump, Matt's going to say how high.
Well, who would that even be is my question, right? If you're Robert Kraft and you're looking for an honest assessment of how this thing is going right now and how you should proceed, whether or not you should be going to Bill Belichick and saying, hey, we got to start building for 2024. I understand you're going to want to win every single game that we have on our schedule, and so maybe you're not looking to trade a Josh Uche, even if he's not going to be with us next year, or a Kyle Duggar, or a Micah Wenu. But this is the kind of thing that we're going to have to do now, Bill, because I'm the owner, and I want to set our team up for the future as best as possible. I don't know who Robert Kraft would go to for that kind of advice on how to proceed with that situation, Giles. There's just so many guys that have been linked to Bill Belichick, and maybe the Teddy Bruschi comments are an indication that there are more willing participants to give an honest assessment of this team out there than I'm willing to give them credit for. I just don't know who Robert Kraft turns to in this situation.
To me, it almost has to be someone outside of the family, outside of the tree altogether. You know what I mean? And if you do that, that's going to be the disruption that probably, Bill, that might be what starts to, kind of unravel this thing.
Well, it's unraveled. It's unraveled. I would say this.
But I want to mean, like, if you go ahead and you get a consultant of someone who has no ties to the Patriots
whatsoever, then it blows it up early.
Yes.
But here's what's interesting. I could have told you
when Mac Jones went over his head. Like, I can't imagine how he'd feel if Robert Kraft's like, hey, I brought in this guy from outside. He's going to tell you how to do your job.
But he owns the team, right, Tom? I mean, he has to acknowledge this is his boss.
It's his boss. And here's what also was interesting. If Robert Kraft is going to feel as if, well, I can't overstep on football decisions, every single one of us at this panel and all the players who I talked to about it said, don't get rid of Jacoby Myers. We all got it right. Bill got it wrong. Or Matt Groh got it wrong, if Andrew Callahan and Doug Kyde's story indicates that was a Matt Groh decision. We all have said over the course of time, these are bad signings. I've talked about over the course of years, Tyler Lockett, Sterling Shepard, draft these guys. They'd be good. And you end up with a Cole Strange, or you end up with a N'Keal Harry. I mean, I just don't think that fixing the team personnel-wise absolutely positively needs somebody who spent 50 years in football. I'm not volunteering my services, but the upshot of it is...
But for the right price, Tommy Curran will do it.
The bar is so friggin' low because Bill has been, on a Costanza opposite day going on here for 5 years that just you can't do worse if you tried.
Is that what could speed up? And you kind of hinted at it. Like take out of the equation Robert Kraft finding someone to, I guess, I don't want to say go over Bill's head, but go over Bill's head and say, listen, this guy is going to help you make the decisions going forward. Is it possible that if he allows Bill Belichick to handle the trade deadline on his own and he screws that up, does that speed up the process to the point where none of us think that he would ever let Bill Belichick go mid-season? But are we talking about after the trade deadline, if it doesn't go well and they're 1-7, does that speed up that timeline?
I don't know. That's a lot of hypotheticals. Honestly, that was a lot of hypotheticals. So I don't know if I can process that.
Basically, I'm saying if he screws, I almost said, oh my God, I almost swore for like the first time ever on TV. If he screws up the trade deadline and they're 1-7, is he gone? No hypotheticals.
I think it's hard to prove a negative.
There has to be a fight.
Well, it's hard to prove a negative too. Like, how would you screw up the trade deadline? I mean, you could always say, well, we had talks, and nobody's willing to even take some of these guys. Which there's probably an argument there to be made as well. I mean, how many takers are looking at your roster right now and saying, boy, if only we could have sort of carte blanche on what the Patriots have going on over there. There's just not that much talent on this roster. And the flip side to the conversation we're having, which is maybe Robert would want Bill Belichick to start moving pieces to build the team toward the future, is this. Maybe Robert Kraft would just sort of say, I'm going to be hands-off because I know Bill's going to be hands-off, and whoever comes in next, I want them to make the decision on Kyle Duggar. I want them to make the decision on Kendrick Bourne. And if they want him, great. We could figure out a contract for these guys. If they don't, then it's up to them. That might be the hands-off approach that I would actually, if I was trying to handicap it, I would lean toward if I'm Robert. Doesn't that mean that
he has to veto the trades then? And say, just don't do anything, Bill?
Maybe, but I think it's in Bill Belichick's nature not to trade away game-changing players because he's going to want to try to go, if they're 4-12 at the end of the season, he's going to want to try to go 5-12.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, I think you got to look at it too. Like people, they talk about it like, oh no, you got to sell off all your pieces. Well, what are you left with if you sell off any of your valuable assets at this point, right? I mean, at some point you got to build something. Like, you can't just get rid of, Kyle Duggar and Josh Uche and then look around and say we've got no pass rushers, we've got no one else. Marte Mapu might be the replacement for Kyle Duggar. But at some point, like, you do need players for next year. And if your head coach is in the building, he might like some of those players.
All right, it'll be an interesting. Well, it's been interesting, probably like
total
6
control does
months.
not seem to be going over big on the poll.
No one. 3% want total control. Your winner
and those
is
guys hit it by mistake.
Hands off, you're gone soon. We know how the people feel. They are ready for this era to end.